On a cold desert morning in July 1945, a man stood alone in the New Mexico wilderness and quietly prepared to change the fate of every human being who would ever live after him. He did not look like a conqueror. He did not look like a general. He looked thin, exhausted, and haunted. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his hat against the wind. His name was J. Robert Oppenheimer, and he knew that within hours, the world would divide itself into two eras, everything before that morning, and everything after. He also knew that if he was wrong, if even a single calculation had been misjudged, he and everyone within 10 miles would be vaporized instantly. But to understand how the fate of civilization came to rest on the shoulders of a nervous physicist in the middle of nowhere, you have to go back decades earlier, to a frightened immigrant boy standing on a crowded dock in New York Harbor. The year was 1884. The boy's name was Isidore Rabi. He was 6 years old, small for his age, clutching his mother's hand as waves slapped against the wooden pilings beneath their feet. He had come from a place where Jews were hunted, where soldiers could kick down your door in the night and drag away your father forever. America, people said, was different. America was possibility. America was safety. America was the future. He didn't know it yet, but this frightened boy would one day help unlock the secret forces hidden inside the atom itself. And he would help create the weapon that would end World War II and begin the nuclear age. But America itself was still young then, still growing, still becoming the industrial giant that would dominate the 20th century. In 1884, electricity was still new. Most homes used oil lamps. Horses filled the streets. The tallest buildings in New York were barely 10 stories high. The Statue of Liberty had not yet been completed. And yet, beneath the surface, something was already happening. Something invisible, something unstoppable. Science was beginning to discover that the world was not made of solid things, but of tiny invisible structures called atoms. At first, atoms seemed harmless. They were just ideas, theoretical curiosities, abstract concepts debated by professors in quiet university halls. No one imagined they contained enough energy to destroy entire cities. No one imagined that someday, a single bomb would kill over 100,000 people in seconds. No one imagined that schoolchildren would one day practice hiding under desks, preparing for the end of the world. But the path toward that future had already begun. In 1897, an English physicist named J.J. Thomson made a discovery that shocked the scientific world. He discovered the electron. It was the first proof that atoms were not solid, indivisible objects, as people had believed for thousands of years. They had internal structure. They had parts. And if atoms had parts, it meant something else. It meant they could, theoretically, be broken. At the time, no one understood the true implications. Thomson himself could not have imagined that his discovery would eventually lead to weapons capable of ending civilization. He was simply curious. Curiosity, more than anything else, is what drove the scientists who would later build the atomic bomb. Not hatred, not war, curiosity. One of those curious children was born in New York City in 1904. His name was Robert Oppenheimer. His father was a wealthy textile importer. His mother was an artist. They lived in a large apartment filled with paintings by Picasso and Van Gogh. From the outside, his life seemed perfect. But Robert was different. He was quiet, withdrawn, intense. Other children played games. Robert collected minerals. He would hold them in his hands, studying their shapes, wondering what secrets they held inside. By age 9, he was writing letters to professional geologists. By age 12, he was giving lectures to adults. His mind moved faster than everyone else's. But genius came at a cost. He struggled socially. He was painfully shy. He often felt like an outsider, even among friends. Inside his mind was a universe of ideas that few others could understand. At Harvard University, he completed 4 years of study in just 3. He studied physics, chemistry, literature, philosophy, and languages. He could read Sanskrit. He could quote ancient texts from memory. He was brilliant, and he was deeply troubled. Years later, while studying in England, He became so depressed and emotionally unstable that he poisoned an apple and left it on his professor's desk. No one knows exactly why he did it. Perhaps he felt inferior. Perhaps he felt invisible. Perhaps he felt like he was losing control. The professor never ate the apple. The incident was quietly covered up. But it revealed something important about Robert Oppenheimer. He was capable of darkness. He was capable of dangerous thoughts. He was human. Meanwhile, across the ocean in Germany, another group of scientists was making discoveries that would change everything. In 1938, two German chemists, Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann, conducted an experiment that seemed impossible. They split the atom. They discovered nuclear fission. When certain atoms, like uranium, were struck by neutrons, they broke apart and released enormous amounts of energy. Energy far greater than any chemical explosion. Energy millions of times more powerful than dynamite. At first, even they didn't fully understand what they had done. But other scientists did. One of them was Albert Einstein. Einstein had already changed the world once with his famous equation, E = mc². Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. It meant that even tiny amounts of matter contained enormous energy. Now, nuclear fission proved that energy could actually be released. It meant one thing: a bomb of unimaginable power was possible. And there was something even more terrifying. Germany had discovered it first. Germany, now controlled by Adolf Hitler. Hitler, who had already invaded countries across Europe. Hitler, who had already begun the systematic murder of millions. If Hitler got the atomic bomb first, he could win the war. He could conquer the world. He could create a nightmare from which there would be no escape. Einstein, a lifelong pacifist, did something he never thought he would do. He wrote a letter to the President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The letter was brief, but it would change history forever. It warned that Nazi Germany might be developing atomic weapons. It urged America to act immediately. Roosevelt read the letter carefully. He understood its meaning. He turned to his advisor and said quietly, "We cannot let this happen." And with those words, the most secret and expensive scientific project in human history began. The Manhattan Project. At first, it was small. A few scientists, a few experiments, a few $1 million. But soon, it grew. It became massive. Over 130,000 people would eventually work on it. Entire cities would be built in secret. Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Hanford, Washington, Los Alamos, New Mexico. Most workers didn't even know what they were building. They were told only what they needed to know. Secrecy was absolute. Even Vice President Harry Truman didn't know about the project until he became president. And at the center of it all was the quiet, haunted physicist from New York. Robert Oppenheimer. He was an unlikely choice. He had no Nobel Prize. He had never managed a large organization. He was politically suspicious. He had friends who were communists. The FBI did not trust him. But General Leslie Groves, the military leader of the project, saw something others did not. He saw brilliance. He saw intensity. He saw a man who could do the impossible. Groves appointed Oppenheimer as scientific director. Together, they built a secret laboratory in the New Mexico desert. Los Alamos. It did not exist on maps. Mail was censored. Phones were monitored. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter. The greatest scientific minds in the world gathered there. Enrico Fermi, Richard Feynman, Edward Teller, Isidore Rabi, the frightened immigrant boy who had arrived in America decades earlier. They worked day and night. They knew what they were building. They knew what it would do. Some believed it would end the war quickly and save millions of lives. Others feared it would doom humanity forever. But none of them could stop. Because they believed Germany was building one too. And they had to be first. They had to be first. Or nothing else would matter. And as July 1945 approached, as the desert heat baked the earth and the tension grew unbearable, Robert Oppenheimer began to realize something that terrified him more than failure. They were going to succeed. And success would change the world forever. He would later say that in that moment, he remembered a line from an ancient Sanskrit text. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." He did not say it with pride. He said it with horror. Because he understood something no one else fully grasped yet. Once humanity unlocked the power of the atom, there would be no going back. Ever. And in just a few hours, at a place called Trinity Site, the first atomic bomb would explode. And the modern world would begin. At 2:30 a.m. on July 16, 1945, the desert was silent. The sky above Jornada del Muerto, the journey of the dead man, was heavy with clouds. Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the jagged outline of the Oscara Mountains. Rain had threatened all night, and General Leslie Groves was furious. If the storm didn't clear, they would have to delay the test. Delay meant uncertainty. Delay meant risk. Delay meant the possibility that somewhere, perhaps in the ruins of defeated Germany, or hidden deep inside the Soviet Union, other scientists were working toward the same terrible goal. Robert Oppenheimer stood with his hands in his pockets, staring into the darkness. He hadn't slept. No one had. In the distance, perched atop a 100-foot steel tower, was a device the scientists had nicknamed simply the gadget. It didn't look like much. Just wires, metal, circuits, ordinary materials assembled into something extraordinary. Something that had never existed before in the entire history of Earth. Something that would release energy equivalent to 20,000 tons of TNT. Enough to flatten a city. Enough to kill tens of thousands of people instantly. Enough to prove that human beings had gained the power of the sun. Nearby, in bunkers and observation posts, scientists and soldiers waited nervously. Some wore welding goggles. Others lay flat on the ground, facing away from the tower, instructed not to look directly at the blast. They had made calculations. They had run simulations. They believed they understood what would happen. But deep down, there was fear. Real fear. Enrico Fermi, the Italian physicist who had fled fascist Europe, carried small pieces of paper in his pocket. He planned to drop them during the blast to estimate the energy of the explosion based on how far the shockwave carried them. It was an improvised experiment. Even now, they were still learning, still guessing, still walking into the unknown. At 4 a.m., the storm still hadn't passed. Groves considered postponing, but then, slowly, the clouds began to clear. The rain stopped. The sky opened. The desert held its breath. At 5:10 a.m., the final countdown began. The loudspeaker crackled. T-20 minutes. Oppenheimer said nothing. He simply stared. His mind drifted. He thought about his childhood in New York. He thought about the young students who had come to Los Alamos, full of excitement and innocence. He thought about Germany, now defeated. Germany had never completed their bomb. They had not even come close. Which meant something else now. This weapon was no longer just a race against Hitler. It was something new, something else, something far more complicated. T-5 minutes. Some men prayed. Others smoked nervously. Others joked, pretending not to be afraid. But everyone understood. This was the most important experiment ever conducted. Not just scientifically, historically, existentially. T-1 minute. Oppenheimer's heart pounded. He later said he felt both anticipation and dread, excitement and terror. He had spent 3 years working toward this moment. And now it was here. T-10 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. At 5 hours 29 minutes and 45 seconds a.m., the universe changed. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then, light. A light brighter than the sun. A blinding white flash that turned night into day. Men who had been instructed not to look still saw it through closed eyes, through their hands, through their goggles. It penetrated everything. It felt alive. The fireball expanded instantly, growing larger and larger, boiling upward into the sky. Colors shifted from white to yellow to orange to red. The desert floor vaporized. Sand turned into glass. The tower disappeared completely, erased from existence. A massive mushroom cloud rose upward, climbing 40,000 feet into the atmosphere. Then came the shockwave, a deep, powerful roar that slammed into the observers. Windows shattered miles away. The ground trembled. The sound echoed across the mountains. Some scientists laughed. Some cheered. Some stood in stunned silence. Others wept. Oppenheimer did not cheer. He did not laugh. He stood frozen. He understood. He understood what they had done. He understood what it meant. He later recalled that Sanskrit line again. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. At that moment, humanity had crossed a line from which there was no return. The atomic age had begun. News of the successful test was sent immediately to Washington, D.C. President Harry Truman was in Potsdam, Germany, meeting with Allied leaders to decide the fate of the post-war world. He was handed a simple message. It worked. Truman understood instantly. He now possessed the most powerful weapon ever created. And he faced an impossible decision. Japan was still fighting. Germany had surrendered in May 1945. But Japan refused to surrender. Despite devastating firebombing campaigns that had destroyed entire cities, Japan's military leadership remained defiant. American military planners feared that invading Japan would cost hundreds of thousands of American lives. Possibly millions of Japanese lives. The atomic bomb offered another option. A terrible option, but an option. A way to end the war quickly. Without invasion. Without prolonged slaughter. At least, that was the hope. The bomb was ready. Now came the question no one had wanted to answer. Would they use it? Meanwhile, inside Los Alamos, celebrations were muted. Some scientists felt relief. Others felt dread. One physicist, Leo Szilard, who had helped initiate the project, now tried to stop it. He circulated petitions, urging the government not to use the bomb against civilians. He feared it would begin an arms race. He feared it would lead to a future where nations lived under constant threat of annihilation. But the decision was no longer in the hands of scientists. It belonged to politicians. And politicians were thinking about ending the war. They were thinking about power. They were thinking about the future balance of the world. They were thinking about the Soviet Union. Because even though the United States and the Soviet Union had been allies against Germany, tensions were already rising. Both sides understood what the atomic bomb meant. It meant dominance. It meant deterrence. It meant fear. On August 6, 1945, at 8:15 a.m., an American B-29 bomber named Enola Gay flew over the Japanese city of Hiroshima. Inside the aircraft was a single bomb. Its nickname was Little Boy. It weighed nearly 10,000 pounds. It contained uranium. At exactly 8:15 a.m., the bomb was released. It fell silently for 43 seconds. Then it detonated 1,900 feet above the city. In an instant, everything beneath it disappeared. A blinding flash. A fireball hotter than the surface of the sun. Buildings vaporized. People turned into shadows burned onto walls. An estimated 70,000 people died instantly. By the end of the year, over 140,000 would be dead. 3 days later, a second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. Japan surrendered 6 days later. World War II was over. But something else had begun. The nuclear arms race. And somewhere, hidden within the Manhattan Project itself, someone had already begun secretly passing atomic secrets to America's next greatest rival. The Soviet Union. His name was Klaus Fuchs. And his betrayal would ensure that America would not remain alone in the atomic age for long. In the summer of 1945, as the United States celebrated victory and the end of the most destructive war in human history, a quiet man walked calmly through the guarded gates of Los Alamos. No one stopped him. No one questioned him. He had the proper clearance. He had the proper credentials. He was one of them. His name was Klaus Fuchs. He was polite, soft-spoken, intelligent, the kind of man people trusted instinctively. He did not drink much. He did not brag. He did not attract attention. He was, in almost every way, invisible, which made him the most dangerous man in America, because Klaus Fuchs was a spy, and for years, he had been stealing the most valuable secrets on Earth. He had been born in Germany in 1911. His father was a Lutheran pastor who opposed Adolf Hitler. The family believed in democracy, in justice, in equality. When Hitler rose to power in 1933, everything changed. Political enemies were arrested. Freedom disappeared. Fear ruled everything. Fuchs, a brilliant physics student, understood that Germany was no longer safe. He fled first to France, then to England, leaving behind his home, his identity, his country. He hated the Nazis. He hated what Germany had become. But during his years as a refugee, he developed another belief. He believed that capitalism itself was dangerous. He believed that only communism could create true equality. And slowly, quietly, he became loyal not to Germany, not to England, not to America, but to the Soviet Union. He believed the Soviet Union represented the future. He believed helping them was helping humanity. It was a belief that would alter global history forever. When World War II began, British scientists recruited Fuchs to help with their atomic research. His intelligence was undeniable. His mathematical skills were extraordinary. He quickly became indispensable. Later, when Britain joined the Manhattan Project, Fuchs was sent to America. He arrived at Los Alamos in 1944. No one suspected him. He worked alongside America's greatest scientists. He attended classified meetings. He saw everything. He learned everything. And quietly, methodically, he began passing secrets to the Soviet Union. He met his contact in secret locations. Sometimes on park benches. Sometimes on quiet streets. He handed over documents, calculations, blueprints, details about the bomb's design. Details that had cost billions of dollars and years of effort to discover. He did not do it for money. He did it because he believed it was right. Because he believed no single country should control such power. Because he believed balance would prevent tyranny. But he could not foresee the full consequences. In Moscow, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin already knew about the Manhattan Project long before Hiroshima. Not because of guesswork, because of spies, including Klaus Fuchs. When President Truman casually mentioned a powerful new weapon to Stalin during the Potsdam Conference, Stalin showed no surprise. He simply nodded calmly, but inside, he already understood. He already knew. He had already ordered his scientists to build their own bomb. With Fuchs's stolen secrets, Soviet scientists moved faster than anyone expected. Much faster. American leaders believed they had years of nuclear monopoly. They were wrong. On August 29, 1949, just 4 years after Hiroshima, the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb. The explosion shocked the United States. It terrified American leaders. It changed everything overnight. America was no longer alone. The nuclear arms race had begun, and no one knew how far it would go. Back in America, suspicion began to grow. The FBI launched investigations. They knew secrets had leaked. They just didn't know how, or who. Years passed. Then, in 1950, everything unraveled. British intelligence confronted Klaus Fuchs. At first, he denied nothing. He calmly confessed. He explained everything. He had no regrets. He believed he had helped preserve peace. He believed he had prevented one nation from dominating the world. He was arrested, convicted, sentenced to prison, but the damage was already done. The Soviet Union had the bomb, and they would build even more powerful ones. Soon, both nations would create hydrogen bombs, hundreds of times more powerful than the bombs dropped on Japan. Weapons capable of destroying entire regions, entire civilizations, entire futures. But Klaus Fuchs was not the only spy. In New York City, another secret network operated quietly. At the center were Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. They looked ordinary. They lived in a small apartment. They had 2 children. They appeared to be a normal American family. But prosecutors would later argue they were part of a spy network that passed atomic secrets to the Soviet Union. Julius had recruited engineers and scientists. He collected information. He passed it to Soviet contacts. The FBI arrested him in 1950. Soon after, they arrested Ethel. Their trial became one of the most famous in American history. The courtroom was filled with tension, fear, politics. The Cold War had begun. Americans feared communism, feared infiltration, Feared betrayal. Prosecutors argued that the Rosenbergs had helped the Soviet Union obtain atomic weapons faster, that their actions endangered millions. The defense argued they were innocent, victims of fear and paranoia, but the jury found them guilty. In 1953, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were executed in the electric chair. They were the only American civilians executed for espionage during the Cold War. To this day, their case remains controversial. Some believe they were guilty. Others believe Ethel's role was exaggerated. But one fact was undeniable. America's atomic secrets had spread. And now, the world lived under a permanent shadow. Meanwhile, Robert Oppenheimer, the man who had led the Manhattan Project, began to change. He had seen what the bomb could do. He had seen Hiroshima. He had seen Nagasaki. He felt responsible. He became increasingly opposed to developing even more powerful weapons. He argued against building the hydrogen bomb. He warned of an endless arms race. He warned of destruction beyond imagination. But the government no longer trusted him. His past associations, his political views, his opposition to new weapons, all made him suspicious. In 1954, the US government stripped him of his security clearance. He was humiliated. Publicly, the man who had helped build the atomic bomb was now treated as a risk, a threat, a problem. He spent the rest of his life in quiet regret. He had changed the world, but not in the way he had hoped. By the 1960s, both the United States and Soviet Union possessed thousands of nuclear weapons, enough to destroy humanity many times over. Missiles stood ready, bombers waited, submarines patrolled silently beneath the oceans. At any moment, one mistake could end everything. And in October 1962, that almost happened. The Cuban Missile Crisis. For 13 days, the world stood on the edge of nuclear war. American and Soviet forces prepared for conflict. People feared the end. Schoolchildren practiced duck and cover drills. Families built fallout shelters. Everyone waited. And somehow, at the last moment, disaster was avoided. Not by weapons, not by bombs, but by human restraint, human fear, human understanding. Because for the first time, humanity truly understood what nuclear war meant. Not victory, not conquest, but extinction. Robert Oppenheimer died in 1967. He never fully escaped the shadow of what he had helped create. But before his death, he said something important. He said, "The physicists have known sin." He did not mean evil. He meant responsibility, because knowledge had given humanity power, and power had changed everything. Forever. The atomic age did not just change war. It changed politics, science, fear, hope, survival, and even today, thousands of nuclear weapons still exist. Silent, waiting, never used again. Because the world remembers Hiroshima. The world remembers Nagasaki. The world remembers Trinity. And the morning when a quiet man stood in the desert and watched the birth of a power that humanity may never fully control. And yet, the most astonishing truth of all is this. The fate of civilization did not change because of one man. It changed because of thousands. Immigrants, refugees, dreamers, scientists, spies, leaders, all human, all flawed, all afraid, all curious, all part of the same story. A story that began with a frightened boy arriving in America, and ended with humanity holding the power of the stars in its hands. On October 27, 1962, the world came closer to nuclear destruction than at any other moment in human history. Not metaphorically, not politically, literally, and the fate of civilization rested, for a few terrifying minutes, in the hands of a single man floating in a damaged submarine beneath the Caribbean Sea. His name was Vasily Arkhipov, and almost no one knew he existed. For 13 days, the United States and the Soviet Union had been locked in a silent confrontation that threatened to erupt into nuclear war at any moment. It had begun when an American U-2 spy plane photographed something shocking in Cuba. Long, cylindrical objects, missile launch sites, construction crews, military equipment. Careful analysis confirmed the truth. The Soviet Union was secretly placing nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida. Missiles capable of reaching Washington, D.C. Missiles capable of reaching New York. Missiles capable of killing tens of millions of Americans within minutes. President John F. Kennedy was informed immediately. He was only 45 years old. Young, intelligent, but now burdened with a decision that could end human civilization. His military advisors urged immediate airstrikes. Destroy the missiles. Destroy Cuba's ability to threaten America. But Kennedy hesitated, because he understood something critical. If America attacked Cuba, the Soviet Union might retaliate. If the Soviet Union retaliated, America would respond. And if both sides launched nuclear weapons, there would be no winners. Only ashes. Instead, Kennedy ordered a naval blockade of Cuba. No Soviet ships would be allowed to deliver additional weapons. The world watched and waited. Every hour increased the tension. Every hour increased the risk of war. American nuclear missiles were prepared. Soviet nuclear missiles were prepared. Bombers sat ready on runways. Submarines moved silently beneath the oceans. Each side waited for the other to make a mistake. And deep beneath the Caribbean Sea, aboard a Soviet submarine designated B-59, conditions were deteriorating rapidly. The submarine had been underwater for days. It was hot inside, over 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Air conditioning had failed. Carbon dioxide levels were rising. The crew was exhausted, sweating, struggling to breathe. They had lost contact with Moscow. They did not know what was happening above the surface. They did not know if war had already begun. And then, suddenly, explosions. Loud, violent, close. The submarine shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. The crew froze. American naval forces above them had begun dropping depth charges. Not intended to destroy the submarine, only to force it to surface. But the crew of B-59 didn't know that. They believed they were under attack. They believed war had begun. They believed they might already be the last survivors of their nation. Inside the submarine was a single nuclear torpedo. It was not a small weapon. It had explosive power roughly equal to the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. If launched against an American aircraft carrier, it would destroy the ship instantly and trigger nuclear war. The submarine's captain, Valentin Savitsky, was under immense pressure. He was exhausted, overheated, cut off from communication, surrounded by explosions. He reached a conclusion. War had begun. He gave the order to prepare the nuclear torpedo. The crew obeyed. They began the launch sequence. But Soviet protocol required agreement from 3 senior officers to fire a nuclear weapon. Savitsky agreed. The political officer agreed. Only one man remained, Vasily Arkhipov. He was the second in command. Quiet, calm, respected. Savitsky turned to him. Arkhipov understood the situation. He understood the danger. He understood that if they launched the torpedo, nuclear war would almost certainly follow. Millions would die, possibly billions. Civilization itself might collapse. But he also understood something else. They did not know for certain that war had begun. The explosions might be warnings, not attacks. The Americans might not know they carried nuclear weapons. Launching the torpedo could trigger catastrophe unnecessarily. Savitsky was furious. He argued. He shouted. He believed honor demanded action. He believed surrender was unacceptable. The political officer supported him. Arkhipov stood alone. One man against 2. One voice against destruction. He refused. Calmly, firmly, he argued they must surface. Confirm orders. Avoid irreversible decisions. The argument continued. Minutes passed. Minutes that could determine the fate of humanity. Finally, Savitsky relented. The submarine surfaced. No nuclear torpedo was fired. War did not begin, because one man refused to say yes. Above the ocean, American ships watched as the Soviet submarine emerged from the water. Tense, armed, ready, but no nuclear weapons were launched. No war began. Slowly, carefully, the crisis began to ease. Back in Washington and Moscow, negotiations continued. Both Kennedy and Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev understood the truth. They were standing on the edge of extinction. Neither wanted to fall. Khrushchev agreed to remove Soviet missiles from Cuba. Kennedy secretly agreed to remove American missiles from Turkey. The crisis ended. The world survived. But few people knew how close it had come. And almost no one knew about Vasily Arkhipov. His actions remained secret for decades. He received no medals, no fame, no recognition. He lived quietly. He died in 1998. Only later did historians realize the truth. That one man, unknown and unseen, had prevented nuclear war. Had saved millions. Had saved the future. The nuclear age continued. Weapons grew more powerful, more numerous, more precise. At its peak, the world contained over 70,000 nuclear weapons. Enough to destroy civilization many times over. And yet, none were used in war again. Not because they disappeared, but because humanity understood their cost. Mutually assured destruction. If one side launched, both sides would die. Fear became peace. Terror became restraint. And the legacy of the Manhattan Project, of Oppenheimer, of Fuchs, of the Rosenbergs, of Kennedy, of Arkhipov, became something larger than war. It became a warning, a reminder, that human intelligence could create unimaginable power. And human wisdom was the only thing preventing its use. Even today, nuclear submarines patrol silently beneath the oceans. Missiles remain ready. Systems remain armed. The power still exists. But so does the memory. Of Trinity. Of Hiroshima. Of October 27, 1962. And of one quiet man in a submarine. Who said no, and in doing so, may have saved the entire world. For years after the Cuban Missile Crisis, the world lived with a strange and fragile peace. It was not peace built on trust. It was peace built on fear. Both the United States and the Soviet Union understood that nuclear war would mean suicide. Not defeat, not loss, total annihilation. Entire cities erased, entire populations burned or poisoned. The very air and soil turned deadly. And so, instead of fighting directly, they fought in shadows. It became known as the Cold War. There were no massive invasions between the superpowers. No tanks rolling toward Washington or Moscow. Instead, there were spies, secrets, proxy wars, and a constant race to build more powerful weapons. Because neither side trusted the other to stop first. In underground silos across America, intercontinental ballistic missiles stood ready, each one capable of traveling thousands of miles in under 30 minutes. Each one carrying nuclear warheads far more powerful than the bombs used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Young American soldiers, barely out of high school, sat in concrete bunkers 24 hours a day. They held keys that could launch those missiles. 2 keys, turned at the same time. That was all it would take. 2 young men, following orders, could end millions of lives. They trained constantly. They practiced launch procedures. They memorized their protocols. And they hoped they would never receive the real order. Because if they did, there would be no time for hesitation. No time for debate. No time for doubt. Only obedience. Only execution. In the Soviet Union, the same preparations were underway. Missiles hidden deep in forests. Missiles mounted on mobile launchers. Missiles hidden beneath the sea in silent submarines. Each side developed new technologies to ensure survival even after nuclear attack. Submarines became the most terrifying weapons of all. Unlike missiles in silos, submarines could not be easily destroyed. They moved silently, invisibly, across the oceans. Even if America were completely destroyed, its submarines could still retaliate. Even if the Soviet Union were completely destroyed, its submarines could still retaliate. It guaranteed mutual destruction. It guaranteed that nuclear war had no winner. This doctrine became known as mutually assured destruction. MAD. The acronym itself seemed like a warning. Because the entire system depended on rational behavior. It depended on human restraint. It depended on no one making a mistake. And yet, mistakes happened. More often than anyone realized. On September 26, 1983, in a Soviet early warning bunker near Moscow, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov began his shift like any other day. He was responsible for monitoring satellite systems designed to detect incoming American nuclear missiles. If missiles were detected, he would report it immediately. His report could trigger nuclear retaliation. It was an ordinary night. Quiet, routine, until suddenly, alarms began to scream. Red lights flashed across the control panels. The system displayed a terrifying message. Launch detected. An American missile was heading toward the Soviet Union. Petrov froze. Seconds later, another alarm. A second missile detected. Then a third. Then a fourth. Then a fifth. 5 American nuclear missiles. According to protocol, he had only minutes to respond. If he reported the attack, Soviet leadership would likely launch a full nuclear counterattack. Hundreds of missiles, thousands of warheads, world-ending destruction. Petrov stared at the screen. Something didn't feel right. If America were launching a real nuclear war, they wouldn't send only 5 missiles. They would send hundreds. Overwhelming force. Total destruction. But the system insisted. 5 missiles were coming. He had to decide. Trust the machine, or trust his instincts. He chose his instincts. He reported it as a false alarm. He waited. Seconds passed. Minutes passed. No explosions. No impact. No war. The system had malfunctioned. Sunlight reflecting off clouds had fooled the satellite sensors. If Petrov had followed protocol, nuclear war might have begun. But he didn't. He trusted human judgment over automated certainty. And the world survived another close call. Petrov would receive no reward. No celebration. His actions remained secret. He lived quietly, unknown, another invisible guardian of humanity. As decades passed, the Cold War slowly began to thaw. Leaders on both sides began to understand the absurdity of their situation. They possessed enough weapons to destroy the world many times over, yet they could never safely use them. The weapons existed only to never be used. It was a paradox, a terrifying balance. In 1986, American President Ronald Reagan met Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev in Reykjavik, Iceland. They spoke privately. They discussed the possibility of eliminating nuclear weapons entirely. For a moment, it seemed possible. For a moment, it seemed humanity might escape the shadow of extinction. But fear, mistrust, and politics prevented complete disarmament. Still, progress began. Treaties were signed. Weapons were reduced. Tensions eased. And in 1991, something extraordinary happened. The Soviet Union collapsed. Without war, without nuclear conflict, one of the most powerful empires in history simply dissolved. The Cold War ended, and humanity stepped back from the edge. Today, the nuclear weapons still exist. Thousands of them, hidden, maintained, ready, but unused. Because the memory remains. The memory of Trinity. The memory of Hiroshima. The memory of frightened men in submarines. The memory of officers who chose restraint. The memory of how close humanity came to destroying itself. And how, again and again, ordinary individuals, scientists, soldiers, officers, made quiet decisions that preserved the future. The atomic age was not defined only by destruction. It was defined by responsibility, by restraint, by the fragile hope that wisdom would continue to outweigh fear. Because the greatest truth of the nuclear age is not that humanity created the power to destroy itself. It is that, despite everything, humanity has chosen not to use it again. Not yet, and somewhere, deep beneath the ocean, silent submarines still patrol in darkness. Waiting, not for war, but for the continued courage of those who choose peace. In the early morning hours of November 9, 1979, deep inside a reinforced bunker beneath Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado, a computer screen displayed something that should never have appeared. A full-scale nuclear attack was underway. The system showed hundreds of Soviet missiles flying toward the United States. Their targets were clear: Washington, D.C., New York, Chicago, strategic military bases, airfields, command centers, everything. Inside the bunker, officers froze. This was not a drill. This was not a simulation. This was the real thing. or so it seemed. The warning came from NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command. Their job was simple in concept, but terrifying in reality: detect nuclear attacks and respond immediately. Time was the enemy. Intercontinental ballistic missiles could cross the globe in about 30 minutes. That meant decisions had to be made in minutes. Not hours, not days, minutes. Inside the bunker, telephones rang. Military commanders were notified. Strategic Air Command prepared bombers for immediate takeoff. Pilots ran toward their aircraft. Engines roared to life. Nuclear weapons were loaded. The United States was preparing to retaliate, preparing to end civilization. In Washington, emergency protocols began. The president's advisors were alerted. If the attack were confirmed, nuclear retaliation would follow. There was no alternative. The entire system depended on speed, on immediate response, on the assumption that hesitation meant destruction. But something didn't add up. Radar systems began scanning the skies. They saw nothing. No incoming missiles. Nothing. Satellites saw nothing. No heat signatures. No launches. No attack. Inside Cheyenne Mountain, confusion spread. The computers insisted missiles were coming, but the physical world showed silence. No war, no explosions, no fire, no death. Then, slowly, the truth emerged. Someone had accidentally loaded a training simulation tape into the live operational computer. The system believed the simulation was real. The machines had nearly triggered nuclear war over a mistake. A simple human error. One tape, one moment, one accident. Bombers were recalled. Engines shut down. Pilots climbed out of their cockpits. The world continued. Most Americans never knew how close they had come. Incidents like this happened more often than the public realized. On January 25, 1995, years after the Cold War officially ended, Russian radar systems detected something terrifying. A missile launch. It appeared to be heading toward Russia. Military commanders panicked. President Boris Yeltsin was notified immediately. For the first time in history, the Russian nuclear briefcase, the Chege, was activated in real conditions. Yeltsin had minutes to decide: retaliate or wait. Retaliation meant launching Russian nuclear missiles, launching destruction toward the United States, launching the end of millions of lives. Military advisors urged immediate readiness. Radar showed the missile rising. Higher, closer. Time was running out. But then, they saw something unexpected. The missile did not split into multiple warheads. It did not behave like a nuclear weapon. It followed a different trajectory. It was not an attack. It was a scientific research rocket launched by Norway to study the Northern Lights. Norway had notified Russia in advance, but the message had not reached the right military officials. For a few minutes, humanity had again stood on the edge and stepped back. By the late 20th century, nuclear weapons had become both normal and unreal. They existed everywhere and nowhere, hidden in silos beneath American farmland, hidden in Russian forests, hidden aboard submarines beneath the Arctic ice. Always ready, never used, they became part of the background of human existence. Like earthquakes, like storms, a constant possibility. But something else was happening too. The world was changing. The generation that built the atomic bomb was dying. Oppenheimer was gone. Fermi was gone. Einstein was gone. Their knowledge remained, but their memories faded. The urgency they felt, the fear they understood, the responsibility they carried. New generations grew up without experiencing Hiroshima, without experiencing the Cuban Missile Crisis, without practicing duck and cover drills in school. The danger became abstract, distant. The weapons remained real, but the fear became history. And yet, even now, the system still waits. In the United States, missile launch offices still sit underground. They still train. They still hold keys. In Russia, submarines still patrol beneath the oceans. Silent, hidden, watching. The technology has improved. The weapons have become more precise, more powerful, more controlled. But the fundamental truth has not changed. Human beings still control the system. Human beings still make the decisions. Human beings still carry the responsibility. Not machines. Not computers. People. People with fears. People with doubts. People with judgment. Just like Vasily Arkhipov. Just like Stanislav Petrov. Just like the unknown officer who questioned a computer screen in 1979. Just like the scientists who first unlocked the atom. The atomic age was never just about weapons. It was about choices. Choices made in silence. Choices made in minutes. Choices made by individuals whose names most people would never know. Because history is not only shaped by presidents, not only by generals, not only by famous leaders. It is shaped by quiet decisions. Invisible moments. Ordinary people standing in extraordinary situations. And every day that nuclear weapons remain unused is another day those quiet decisions continue to protect the future. The world did not survive because nuclear weapons were safe. It survived because, again and again, human beings chose restraint over destruction. And somewhere, right now, deep underground, beneath oceans, inside bunkers, behind locked doors, someone is watching a screen, waiting, hoping that the choice will never have to be made. On the evening of September 18, 1980, in a quiet farming region near Damascus, Arkansas, the air smelled of cut grass and diesel fuel. It was peaceful, ordinary, the kind of place where nothing important ever seemed to happen. Beneath that calm farmland, however, hidden under layers of earth and reinforced concrete, was one of the most powerful nuclear weapons ever built by the United States. It sat inside a Titan II missile silo. The Titan II was enormous, over 100 feet tall. It carried a single nuclear warhead with a yield of 9 megatons. That was more than 600 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. One missile, one warhead, one explosion that could erase an entire metropolitan area. And on that night, a simple mistake almost detonated it. It began with a routine maintenance operation. 2 young Air Force technicians were assigned to check the missile. They were trained, careful, professional, but they were also human. Inside the silo, one technician used a socket wrench to loosen a bolt. The wrench slipped from his hand. It fell, falling nearly 80 feet. It struck the side of the missile and pierced the thin metal skin of its fuel tank. At first, there was silence. Then, a hiss. The missile's fuel began leaking. The fuel was Aerosine 50, a highly toxic and volatile substance. It could ignite spontaneously. It could explode with devastating force. Inside the silo, alarms sounded. The technicians froze. They knew immediately how serious the situation was. They evacuated. Emergency teams arrived. Commanders gathered. No one had ever faced this exact scenario before. A leaking nuclear missile, an unstable warhead, a confined space, and no guaranteed solution. As fuel vapor filled the silo, the danger increased. If the fuel ignited, the explosion could destroy the missile. If the missile were destroyed, the nuclear warhead could detonate, or scatter radioactive material across the region. Entire towns could be contaminated. Thousands could die. Military leaders debated what to do. Some argued for immediate evacuation of nearby communities. Others feared panic. Hours passed. Pressure built inside the silo. At 3 a.m., a decision was made. A specialized team would enter the silo and attempt to stabilize the situation. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but necessary. 2 men volunteered. They wore protective suits. They descended into the silo. They knew the risks. They knew the warhead above them could end their lives instantly. They worked carefully, slowly, trying to prevent catastrophe. Then, at 3:01 a.m., everything went wrong. The fuel ignited. A massive explosion tore through the silo. Fire erupted. Concrete shattered. The 740-ton silo door was blown off. It flew into the air like a coin. The missile itself was destroyed. Thrown from the silo, the nuclear warhead was launched into the air. It landed hundreds of feet away. For a moment, no one knew if it would explode. Emergency teams waited, helpless, powerless. The warhead did not detonate. It had safety mechanisms, layers of protection, designed to prevent accidental nuclear explosions. Those safeguards worked. But one man was killed. Airman David Livingston. Several others were injured. A simple dropped wrench had nearly caused one of the worst nuclear accidents in American history. The explosion could have scattered radioactive material across Arkansas. It could have forced mass evacuations. It could have changed countless lives. Instead, catastrophe stopped just short. Because of engineering, because of safety systems, because of luck. The Damascus accident revealed something terrifying. Nuclear weapons were not only dangerous in war, they were dangerous in peace. They were machines, complex, powerful, and vulnerable to human error. And it wasn't the only time. In 1961, near Goldsboro, North Carolina, an American B-52 bomber broke apart mid-air. It carried 2 nuclear bombs, each one far more powerful than Hiroshima. Both bombs fell toward the ground. One of them went through nearly its entire arming sequence. 5 of its 6 safety mechanisms failed. Only a single low-voltage switch prevented detonation. One switch, one tiny component, prevented nuclear disaster on American soil. If it had detonated, millions could have been affected. Entire regions contaminated. History rewritten by accident. These incidents remained secret for years. The public did not know. They trusted that nuclear weapons were controlled, safe, managed perfectly. But behind the scenes, military leaders understood the truth. The system was not perfect. It never could be, because it depended on humans. And humans make mistakes. Even careful humans. Even trained humans. Even brilliant humans. Yet something remarkable also emerged from these close calls. Each incident led to improvements. Better safeguards. Better procedures. Better technology. Lessons learned in silence. Lessons written in classified reports. Lessons designed to ensure the same mistakes would never happen again. The nuclear age matured. It became less reckless, less experimental, more controlled, but never safe, never harmless, only managed, only contained. Today, in quiet control rooms across the world, officers still sit watch. They drink coffee, they monitor screens, they follow protocols, they live normal lives, they have families, children, dreams, and they carry an invisible burden. Because they understand something most people never think about. They understand how fragile civilization can be, how close it has come to ending, how many times it has been saved by caution, by doubt, by hesitation, by luck. The atomic age did not end with Hiroshima. It did not end with the Cold War. It continues, quietly, silently, in the background of modern life. A shadow created by human curiosity, human intelligence, human fear, and human responsibility. And the most astonishing truth is this. The survival of humanity has never been guaranteed. It has been protected, again and again, by individuals, by choices, by moments. Moments where someone paused. Moments where someone questioned. Moments where someone refused to turn a key. Moments where someone said no. And because of those moments, the story of humanity continued. In the early hours of November 24, 1961, a B-52 Stratofortress bomber flew silently through the cold night sky over North Carolina. It was part of a mission known as Operation Chrome Dome. At the height of the Cold War, American bombers carrying nuclear weapons flew continuously, 24 hours a day. They stayed airborne, always ready, always prepared to strike. The logic was simple. If Soviet missiles destroyed American air bases in a surprise attack, bombers already in the sky would survive. They could retaliate. They could ensure mutual destruction. And so, every hour of every day, nuclear weapons floated above the Earth. On that November night, something went wrong. Inside the aircraft, a fuel leak began. At first, it was small, barely noticeable, but slowly, steadily, fuel escaped into the wing. The pilots were alerted. They turned towards Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. They hoped to land safely, but they would never make it. At 9,000 feet, the structural integrity of the aircraft failed. The right wing collapsed. The bomber began to break apart. Inside were 8 crew members and 2 Mark 39 hydrogen bombs. Each bomb carried a yield of approximately 4 megatons, more than 250 times the power of Hiroshima. The aircraft disintegrated, metal tore apart, fire filled the sky, the crew ejected, some survived, some did not, and the bombs fell. One bomb deployed its parachute, exactly as designed. It descended slowly, its safety systems activated, but something terrifying also happened. Multiple arming mechanisms engaged automatically. The bomb behaved exactly as if it had been intentionally dropped over an enemy target. Step by step, its detonation sequence progressed. Switches activated, circuits closed. The weapon prepared itself to explode. But at the final moment, one switch failed. One low-voltage switch. It prevented detonation. The bomb landed safely. The second bomb was not so gentle. Its parachute failed. It struck the ground at over 700 miles per hour. It buried itself deep into the earth. Parts of it were never recovered. Even today, fragments remain buried beneath North Carolina soil. Hidden, silent, a permanent reminder. These accidents forced military leaders to confront an uncomfortable truth. Nuclear weapons were not only tools of war. They were risks simply by existing. They required constant maintenance, constant vigilance, constant perfection, and perfection is something humans rarely achieve. Meanwhile, across the world, another threat was emerging. Not from bombs falling accidentally, but from machines thinking too quickly. By the 1970s and 1980s, computers had become central to nuclear defense systems. Radar systems tracked incoming objects. Satellites monitored missile launches. Computers processed data faster than any human could. The system was designed for speed. Because speed meant survival, but speed also meant danger. Because computers could make mistakes. And when computers made mistakes, humans had only minutes to question them. In 1980, at NORAD, a faulty computer chip worth less than $1 triggered a massive false alarm. It indicated that over 2,000 Soviet missiles were incoming. Military crews scrambled. Bombers prepared for launch. Missile crews prepared to turn their keys. Retaliation was moments away, until other systems showed nothing. No missiles, no attack, no war. One defective chip had nearly caused nuclear retaliation. One tiny piece of hardware, worth less than a cup of coffee, nearly ended millions of lives. These events reshaped military thinking. Gradually, leaders realized something essential. Nuclear war would not begin with certainty. It would begin with confusion, with incomplete information, with fear, with decisions made under pressure. And systems were redesigned. More safeguards added, more confirmation required, more human judgment inserted into automated processes. Because machines could calculate, but only humans could doubt. And doubt had saved the world more than once. By the late 20th century, nuclear weapons had transformed from active battlefield tools into instruments of deterrence. They existed not to be used, but to prevent use. It was a strange balance. Peace maintained by the threat of annihilation. Children grew up unaware of how close the world had come. Cities expanded. Technology advanced. The internet connected billions. Life continued. Normal, ordinary, fragile. Because beneath it all, the weapons remained. Quiet, waiting, unused. In 2007, something happened that shocked even military officials. At Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota, a B-52 bomber was mistakenly loaded with 6 nuclear warheads. The crew did not know. The ground crew did not know. The bomber flew across the United States for over 3 hours, with live nuclear weapons on board. Unsecured, unaccounted for. It was a violation of the most basic safety protocols. For decades, the system had functioned almost perfectly. But human error still existed. Human oversight still failed. The incident triggered massive reforms. Procedures tightened. Training improved. But the lesson remained clear. The danger never fully disappeared. Yet despite everything, the weapons were never used again in war. Not in Korea, not in Vietnam, not in Afghanistan, not in any conflict since 1945. Because leaders understood, once used, there would be no return. No victory, only escalation, only destruction. Today, the world is different. The Cold War is over. Not from bombs falling accidentally, but from machines thinking too quickly. By the 1970s and 1980s, computers had become central to nuclear defense systems. Radar systems tracked incoming objects. Satellites monitored missile launches. Computers processed data faster than any human could. The system was designed for speed. Because speed meant survival, but speed also meant danger. Because computers could make mistakes. And when computers made mistakes, humans had only minutes to question them. In 1980, at NORAD, a faulty computer chip worth less than $1 triggered a massive false alarm. It indicated that over 2,000 Soviet missiles were incoming. Military crews scrambled. Bombers prepared for launch. Missile crews prepared to turn their keys. Retaliation was moments away, until other systems showed nothing. No missiles, no attack, no war. One defective chip had nearly caused nuclear retaliation. One tiny piece of hardware, worth less than a cup of coffee, nearly ended millions of lives. These events reshaped military thinking. Gradually, leaders realized something essential. Nuclear war would not begin with certainty. It would begin with confusion, with incomplete information, with fear, with decisions made under pressure. Systems were redesigned. More safeguards added, more confirmation required, more human judgment inserted into automated processes. Because machines could calculate, but only humans could doubt. And doubt had saved the world more than once. By the late 20th century, nuclear weapons had transformed from active battlefield tools into instruments of deterrence. They existed not to be used, but to prevent use. It was a strange balance. Peace maintained by the threat of annihilation. Children grew up unaware of how close the world had come. Cities expanded. Technology advanced. The internet connected billions. Life continued. Normal, ordinary, fragile, because beneath it all, the weapons remained. Quiet, waiting, unused. In 2007, something happened that shocked even military officials. At Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota, a B-52 bomber was mistakenly loaded with 6 nuclear warheads. The crew did not know. The ground crew did not know. The bomber flew across the United States for over 3 hours, with live nuclear weapons on board, unsecured, unaccounted for. It was a violation of the most basic safety protocols. For decades, the system had functioned almost perfectly, but human error still existed. Human oversight still failed. The incident triggered massive reforms. Procedures tightened, training improved, but the lesson remained clear. The danger never fully disappeared. Yet despite everything, the weapons were never used again in war. Not in Korea, not in Vietnam, not in Afghanistan, not in any conflict since 1945. Because leaders understood, once used, there would be no return. No victory, only escalation, only destruction. Today, the world is different. The Cold War is over. But nuclear weapons still exist. In the United States, in Russia, in China, in France, in the United Kingdom, in India, in Pakistan, in North Korea. Thousands of weapons, each capable of changing history forever. And yet, for over 75 years, they have remained silent. Not because they stopped working, but because humanity learned to live with the knowledge of its own power and its own vulnerability. Because the atomic age revealed something profound. Human beings had become capable of ending their own story, and every day that story continued was not guaranteed. It was chosen by restraint, chosen by caution, chosen by those who understood what was at stake. The atomic age was not just the story of weapons. It was the story of responsibility, of fragile survival, of quiet decisions made in hidden rooms, of ordinary people standing between existence and extinction. And as long as those people continue to choose wisely, the story goes on. In 1972, inside a heavily guarded room in Moscow, 2 groups of men sat across from each other at a long polished table. They did not smile. They did not trust each other. They did not even fully understand each other. But they shared one thing in common. They understood exactly how the world could end. On one side sat American officials, representing President Richard Nixon. On the other side sat Soviet officials, representing General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev. Between them was a document that could change the future of humanity. It was called the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, the ABM Treaty. At first glance, it seemed like a strange agreement. It did not limit nuclear weapons. It did not eliminate bombs. Instead, it limited defense. It limited the ability to stop nuclear missiles. It sounded backwards. Why would nations agree to remain vulnerable? Why would they agree not to defend themselves? The answer was terrifyingly logical. Because if one side could defend itself perfectly, it might risk launching a first strike. If America believed it could block Soviet retaliation, it might attack first. If the Soviet Union believed it could block American retaliation, it might attack first. Defense could make war more likely. Vulnerability made both sides cautious. Vulnerability made both sides hesitate. Vulnerability preserved peace. And so, both nations agreed to remain exposed. Exposed to destruction. Exposed to each other. Because mutual vulnerability meant mutual restraint. It was a peace built not on strength, but on balance. At the same time, another transformation was taking place. Deep beneath the oceans, nuclear submarines became the most important weapons on Earth. Unlike missiles in silos, submarines could move. They could hide. They could survive a first strike. American submarines patrolled silently through the Atlantic and Pacific. Soviet submarines patrolled beneath Arctic ice. Each carried enough nuclear firepower to destroy entire nations. And their crews lived strange lives. Months underwater, no sunlight, no fresh air, no contact with family, only silence, only duty, only the knowledge that they carried civilization-ending power. Inside those submarines, officers followed strict routines. They monitored systems. They maintained weapons. They waited. They hoped they would never receive launch orders. Because launching meant the world above them had already begun to die. Meanwhile, scientists continued studying the long-term effects of nuclear explosions. What they discovered was worse than anyone expected. A full nuclear war would not only destroy cities, it would destroy climate. Massive fires would fill the atmosphere with smoke. Sunlight would be blocked. Temperatures would drop. Crops would fail. Starvation would spread globally. Even countries not directly attacked would suffer. This became known as nuclear winter. It meant nuclear war was not just a military event. It was a planetary event. A global catastrophe. A potential extinction-level event. For the first time in history, humans possessed the ability to destroy not just themselves, but the ecosystems that sustained them. This knowledge changed how leaders thought. Gradually, slowly, cautiously, nuclear arsenals began to shrink. Not disappear, but shrink. Treaties were signed. START I, START II, strategic arms reduction treaties. Thousands of weapons were dismantled. Missiles destroyed. Warheads deactivated. The number of nuclear weapons dropped from over 70,000 to fewer than 15,000. Still enough to destroy civilization, but less than before. Progress, slow, incomplete, but real. And yet, new dangers emerged. Not from superpowers, but from smaller nations. In 1998, India tested nuclear weapons. Weeks later, Pakistan tested nuclear weapons. Two rival nations. Two nuclear powers. Their tensions were immediate. Their borders fragile. Their conflicts unresolved. For the first time, nuclear weapons existed in regions with active, ongoing conflict. The risk of nuclear war was no longer theoretical. It was immediate. Local decisions could have global consequences. In North Korea, nuclear weapons became tools of survival. Its leadership believed nuclear weapons prevented invasion, prevented overthrow, prevented destruction. Nuclear weapons became shields, political tools, symbols of power. The atomic age had spread beyond the original superpowers. The technology could not be contained forever. Knowledge, once discovered, could not be undiscovered. And yet, something remarkable persisted. Despite fear, despite conflict, despite accidents, despite mistakes. Nuclear weapons were never used again in war. Not once, not in anger, not in desperation, not in revenge, because humanity had seen enough, understood enough, feared enough, to stop itself, again and again. Today, in quiet museums across America, pieces of this history remain. Fragments of bombs, missile control panels, photographs of mushroom clouds rising into empty skies. Visitors walk past them silently. Children stare. Adults read plaques. Most cannot fully imagine what it meant, what it still means, because nuclear weapons exist in a strange space. Always present, always invisible, always waiting, but never used. They are ghosts of possibility, reminders of human capability, warnings from history, and somewhere, even now, in underground bunkers, beneath oceans, inside guarded facilities, individuals continue their silent watch. Not seeking war, not hoping for conflict, but standing ready, carrying the burden of knowledge, carrying the responsibility of restraint. Because the atomic age did not end. It became part of the human condition, part of modern existence, part of the fragile balance that allows billions to live ordinary lives. Lives filled with love, with work, with dreams, with futures. Futures that exist because, again and again, when faced with the power to destroy everything, human beings chose not to.